From the outside, my life looked like the American dream: a three-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburb, a silver SUV in the driveway, a wife who still held my hand in public after 28 years. On paper, I was the kind of man people pointed to and said, "That's how you do it." Every morning, I woke at 6:15 without an alarm. Shower, shave, the same brand of aftershave I'd worn since my 30s. The mirror showed a man who had it all together: salt and pepper hair, a firm jaw, a Rolex I'd bought myself for my 50th birthday. But if I looked too long, I'd see the cracks, the way my eyes didn't quite meet their own reflection. Breakfast was black coffee and toast. Susan moved around the kitchen in her robe, humming, always humming. We talked about the weather, the neighbors, our daughter's grad school applications, safe topics, the kind that filled the silence without ever really touching it. I drove to the office the same way every day, left on Maple, right on Fifth, past the diner where the old men sat nursing their coffees. I wondered sometimes if they envied me: the crisp suit, the leather briefcase, the way the receptionist smiled when I walked in. What they couldn't see was the spreadsheet permanently open on my computer: retirement savings versus projected expenses. The numbers didn't add up, not unless I worked another 10 years. And what then? Golf? Vacations with Susan, where we'd take pictures to prove we were happy? At home, we ate dinner at 7. Susan talked about her book club, her yoga class, the new recipe she wanted to try. I nodded, smiled, chewed. Our marriage wasn't broken. There was no yelling, no cheating, no slammed doors. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles into walls, into bones. Some nights, after Susan fell asleep, I'd sit on the back porch with a bourbon and watch the stars. That's when I'd let myself think the dangerous thoughts. Is this all there is? Did I miss something? Then, one Thursday in October, I came home early. Susan's car was gone. Yoga night, I remembered. The house felt different in the silence. I wandered into the living room, past the family photos, the vacation souvenirs, the life we'd built. My hand brushed against her side of the closet. That's when I saw it. A suitcase. Not packed, just there, like a question. I sat on the edge of the bed, the bourbon long gone, and realized I wasn't sure when we'd stopped being us. And worse, I wasn't sure if I had the energy to care. The cracks weren't so small anymore. I didn't touch the suitcase. That's the first thing you should know. I just stood there, staring at it like it might bite me if I moved too fast. It wasn't packed, just tucked behind her winter coats. A hard-shell Samsonite, the kind we'd bought for our anniversary trip to Italy years ago. The kind that was supposed to carry memories, not escape plans. I closed the closet door softly, like I was covering up a crime scene. For 3 days, I said nothing. I went to work. I ate dinner with Susan. I even laughed at one of her book club stories. But every time she left the room, my eyes flicked to the closet. I started noticing other things too. The way she'd pause before answering when I asked about her day, how her phone screen tilted away when she texted. Little betrayals. Or maybe just my paranoia. I couldn't tell anymore. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, I found the receipt. It was stuck in one of her cookbooks. French cuisine for beginners, a hobby she'd abandoned last year. I wasn't snooping, not really. Just looking for the pancake recipe she used to make when our daughter was still home. The paper was crisp, unfamiliar. A bank transfer, dated 2 weeks ago, $18,000 to an account I didn't recognize. My hands shook. Not because of the money, we had enough, or at least I thought we did, but because of what it meant. Planning, secrecy, a life I wasn't part of. That night, I sat in my car outside the house for an hour, engine off, watching the lights flicker in the windows. Our bedroom, the kitchen, the living room, all the stages where we'd performed our marriage for years. I thought about walking in and demanding answers, but what would that change? The truth was already here, in the weight of my keys in my hand, in the way my breath fogged the windshield. Alone. I was already alone. I went inside eventually. Susan was asleep, or pretending to be. I stood in the doorway, watching the slow rise and fall of her shoulders, and wondered who she was dreaming about. If it was me, if it ever had been, The suitcase was still there the next morning, but so was I. And that was the worst part. Knowing and still choosing to pretend I didn't. I slid into a cracked vinyl booth, the kind with decades of stories ground into its seams. The waitress, mid-60s, name tag reading Dolores, filled my cup without asking. "Rough night?" she said, not unkindly. I realized I was still wearing yesterday's clothes. That's when I saw him. 2 stools down, an old man methodically dunking a tea bag, his hands gnarled but steady. Something about the careful way he moved, like every action still mattered, made me stare. Then he turned, caught me looking, and nodded. Not a greeting, an acknowledgment. The way you might nod at another man standing at the edge of a cliff. Dolores called him Lou. When she walked away, he spoke without looking at me. Divorce or death? The question should have shocked me. Instead, I heard myself say, both, maybe. He slid a business card across the counter. Auto repair, cash jobs, no questions. I almost laughed. Me, a man who hadn't changed his own oil since college, working on cars. But the card stayed in my pocket all day, edges pressing against my thigh like a dare. That night, Susan was out. Book club, her text said, though it was Wednesday. I stood in our walk-in closet, her side neatly organized, mine a graveyard of forgotten hobbies, and ran my fingers over the suitcase again. This time, I unzipped it. Empty. Not a metaphor. Literally empty. No clothes, no toiletries, just a single dryer sheet at the bottom, scent long faded. Had she changed her mind? Was this just some bizarre placeholder for an escape she couldn't bring herself to make? The next morning, I drove to Lou's shop. It wasn't about the money. God knows I didn't need another reminder of how far I'd fallen. Maybe I just wanted to be near someone who didn't expect me to be the man I used to be. The bay door was open. Lou stood under a lifted Ford, grease staining his forearms. He didn't seem surprised to see me. Know which end of a wrench is which? No. Good. He tossed me a rag. Easier to teach you, right? For hours, I handed him tools, fetched parts, wiped down engines. My back ached, my hands stank of gasoline, and for the first time in years, I didn't think about Susan once. Until I did. Driving home, stopped at a red light, I noticed the passenger seat was empty. No purse, no discarded Starbucks cup, no evidence a woman had ever sat there, just like the suitcase. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles whitened. Lou hadn't asked my story, but here's the thing about empty spaces. They don't need explanations. They just wait to see what you'll fill them with. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., but I was already awake. For the first time in years, my body had remembered how to anticipate the day. I dressed in the dark, stiff work jeans, a t-shirt thin from washing, boots that no longer cared about polish. The house stayed silent as I moved through it, my footsteps no longer softened by carpet, but by something heavier, acceptance, maybe, or just exhaustion. Lou's shop smelled like metal and motor oil, a scent that had already begun to feel like honesty. That morning, he didn't hand me a rag. He pointed to a '78 Chevy on the lift. Fuel pump, he said, as if those 2 words could rewrite my entire history. My hands shook when I touched the wrench. Not from fear, but from the absurdity. A man who'd spent 30 years in boardrooms suddenly elbow deep in an engine, learning the language of torque and resistance. Lou didn't hover. He let me struggle, let me curse, let me discover the quiet satisfaction of a bolt turning just right. At lunch, we sat on overturned milk crates behind the shop, eating egg salad sandwiches Dolores had packed for us. Lou wiped his hands on his pants and said, "You ever rebuild something?" I thought of my marriage, my life. Not successfully. He nodded toward the Chevy. Engines don't care about your past, only if you show up now. That afternoon, Susan texted, "Can we talk tonight?" 3 words, and suddenly the garage felt too small. I stared at my phone, grease smudging the screen, and realized I didn't know how to answer. The old me would have rushed home, desperate for resolution. But the man holding the wrench, he hesitated. I finished the fuel pump as the sun dipped low. My back ached, my nails were rimmed with grime, but the engine turned over on the first try. The sound rattled through me, a kind of victory I'd forgotten existed. Lou clapped me on the shoulder. Not bad for a suit. Driving home, I kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the passenger seat, not reaching for anyone, just existing in the space. The houses I passed glowed with evening routines. Families at dinner tables, TVs flickering behind curtains. Normal lives. The kind I'd pretended to have for so long. Susan was waiting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. She looked up when I walked in, and I saw it. The hesitation in her eyes, the same quiet fear I'd been carrying. "You're late," she said. I held up my hands, still stained with the day's work. I was rebuilding something. The silence stretched between us, thin but not yet broken. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler hissed to life. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Ordinary sounds, but tonight they felt like the first notes of a song I didn't know the words to. Susan studied my hands, my clothes, the new lines around my eyes. "You look different," she said. I almost laughed. The truth was, I felt different. Not fixed, not whole, but present. For the first time in years, I wasn't a ghost in my own life. But when I opened my mouth to answer, all that came out was, "Can I shower first?" She nodded, and I walked upstairs alone, each step heavier than the last. The bathroom mirror showed a stranger, a man with grease under his fingernails and something like hope in his cracked reflection. I turned on the water, let it run hot. The steam fogged the glass, blurring everything. Maybe that was better. Maybe some questions weren't meant to be seen clearly yet. The shower water ran cold before I turned it off. I stood there, steam curling around me, watching the grime swirl down the drain, oil stains from Lou's shop, sweat from honest work, the last physical traces of my old life disappearing. When I stepped out, Susan was sitting on our bed, her bed now, with 2 glasses of bourbon between us. The good stuff, the bottle we'd been saving for a special occasion. Her hands were steady, but her wedding band caught the light differently, looser, as if her finger had grown thinner. "You smell like gasoline," she said. Not an accusation, just an observation. I took the glass, let the burn of whiskey coat my throat before answering. "It's honest work." A silence settled between us, the kind that used to terrify me. But tonight, it felt different, not empty, but waiting. Susan's eyes flicked to my hands, calloused now, nails permanently edged with black. I saw the question in her gaze before she asked it. "Are you happy?" The simplicity of it stunned me. 30 years together, and we'd never asked each other that. Not really. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping across the bedroom wall like a lighthouse beam. I thought about Lou's shop, the weight of a wrench in my hand, the satisfaction of an engine roaring to life under my care, the way Dolores would leave an extra meatloaf sandwich in my lunch bag every Thursday. Small kindnesses I hadn't earned, but received anyway. "I'm learning," I said finally. Susan nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. Then she reached into the nightstand drawer and slid a single key across the duvet. "Apartment 4B, River Edge Complex. I signed the lease last month," she said. No apology, no tears, just truth. The key gleamed between us, cold metal against floral fabric. I should have felt something, anger, grief, relief. Instead, I felt the ghost of Lou's hand on my shoulder when I'd fixed that Chevy. Not bad for a suit. Susan sipped her bourbon. I thought I'd be gone by now. "Why aren't you?" She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the woman I'd married decades ago, buried under the same layers of disappointment I'd worn. "I was waiting to see if you'd notice." The clock on the bedside table ticked loudly in the silence. My glass was empty. Hers was half full. Somewhere in the house, a pipe creaked, the old bones of a home we'd built together settling into its foundation. I picked up the key, turned it over in my palm. It was lighter than I expected. "When do you leave?" I asked. Susan exhaled, a breath she might have been holding for years. That depends. On what? The question hung between us, unanswered. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the bedroom window like it was trying to get in, or maybe like it was trying to get out. The key stayed on my dresser for 3 days. I'd pass by it in the morning, its dull brass glint against the dark wood, and again at night when I emptied my pockets of bolts and receipts from the shop. Neither of us mentioned it. Susan still slept on her side of the bed, but the space between us had become its own continent. On the 4th day, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of paperwork. Divorce forms, I assumed. But when I looked closer, I saw the letterhead of our daughter's university. Tuition statements. Parent plus loan documents. You're still co-signing? The words came out rougher than I meant them to. Susan didn't look up. She's our daughter. I stared at the numbers on the page, $22,500 per semester, and thought about the $18,000 transfer I'd found months ago. Not an escape fund after all, just a mother making sure her child could finish school. That afternoon at Lou's, I worked on a '65 Mustang with a seized transmission. My hands moved automatically while my mind churned. All those years I'd measured my worth in promotions and bonuses, never realizing Susan had been quietly keeping our world together in ways I'd never noticed. The way she'd always known which teachers our daughter needed gifts for at Christmas. How she'd handled both our aging parents' medical paperwork without complaint. Lou wiped his hands on a rag and squinted at me. You're thinking too loud. I held up a gear, its teeth worn smooth. Can this be salvaged? Everything can be salvaged, he said. Question is whether it's worth the work. That night I sat on the back porch with a beer, listening to the neighborhood settle into darkness. The motion sensor light next door flicked on as Susan pulled into the driveway. She carried a single grocery bag, just enough for one person's dinner. When the sliding door opened behind me, I didn't turn around. She set a second beer on the railing and stood there, close enough that I could smell her shampoo, the same coconut scent she'd used for 20 years. I paid off the last of Jessica's spring semester today, she said. The admission hung between us. No accusation, just fact. I nodded, staring at the condensation rolling down my bottle. I should have known. Susan's silence was answer enough. We stayed like that until the mosquitoes drove us inside. 2 people who had built a life together, now carefully dismantling it piece by piece. Upstairs, I noticed she'd started packing books into boxes. Not the photo albums or good china, just her favorite novels, the spines cracked from years of bedtime reading. I lay awake that night listening to the house settle around us, the groan of pipes, the hum of the refrigerator, all the ordinary sounds that had once meant home. The key still sat on my dresser, catching moonlight through the blinds. Tomorrow, I would take it, or I wouldn't. But tonight, I let myself remember how Susan used to tuck her cold feet against my legs in winter, and how I'd pretended to mind. The morning Susan moved out, I found her standing in the doorway of our daughter's old bedroom, her fingertips brushing the faded sticker stars still clinging to the ceiling. She hadn't cried when she signed the divorce papers, hadn't flinched when we divided the furniture, but now, in this quiet moment, her shoulders trembled. I should have turned away, given her privacy. But something about the way the dawn light caught the silver in her hair, how young she looked in that second despite everything, made me step forward. We did good with her, I said. Susan's hand dropped to her side. We did. A car horn sounded outside, the Uber she'd called for her last boxes. Neither of us moved. Then, without thinking, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old house key I'd carried for 28 years. The one she'd given me the day we bought this place, back when the walls smelled of fresh paint and our future stretched endlessly before us. You should keep this, I said. She stared at the key in my palm, her breath catching. Why? I didn't have an answer, not a logical one. Only the quiet understanding that some loves don't end, they change shape, that our daughter would always need a home to return to, even if it wasn't ours together anymore. Susan took the key, her fingers, warm and familiar, brushed against mine. For a heartbeat, we stood there. 2 people who had loved and failed and tried, bound by all the invisible threads of a shared life. Then the horn honked again, louder this time, and the moment broke. I carried her last box to the car. The trunk clicked shut like a period at the end of a very long sentence. When I turned back, Susan was watching me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You were a good father," she said. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't absolution, just the truth, simple and unadorned. The car pulled away, taking with it the woman I'd loved and the life we'd built. I stood in the driveway until the taillights disappeared, the morning air cool against my skin. Inside, the house echoed with absence. But as I walked through the empty rooms, I noticed something. On the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker I'd kept in the split, Susan had left her favorite mug, the chipped blue one she'd bought on our honeymoon. Not forgotten. Left. I picked it up, tracing the crack in the handle where it had once shattered and been painstakingly glued back together. Imperfect. Whole in its own way. Outside, the first birds of spring began to sing. I poured myself a cup of coffee into her mug and sat at the table we'd bought together all those years ago. The question wasn't whether we could have fixed things. It was whether in the breaking we'd finally learned how to hold each other gently,